Question 7 is a principal question. So principal questions are like reverse efficient assumption questions. They certainly are strengthening questions, right? Because if we're saying that this reasoning conforms to a principle, then if you take the principle, or it happens to be E here, and you inject it into the stimulus, then of course it'll help. How could it not help the argument? In fact, it'll help the argument a lot, right? So let's be mindful, very mindful of just what the argument is, because the critic is, the critic says a lot of useless things. Like, for example, the perennial image of a city on a hill associates elevated location with elevated purposes. Yeah, right? If you ever, that's why, like in Europe, like the hilly cities, right? On top of the hill is where you find the church usually. Okay, so the city's concert hall, its newest civic building, is located on a spectacular hilltop site. Fine. But, all right, so all this stuff was just background context. Here comes our argument, and because, okay, that's our premise, right? Premise over here, conclusion right after the comma, right? So, because the reference over here, the concert hall is far from the center of the city, right? It's on a hilltop site. It cannot fulfill the purpose of a civic building. So, what? That's why. Right? What's the purpose of a civic building? Right? Do you see that? The premise just says it's very far from center city. Okay, its distance, like center city's here, it's like over here, right? It's very far. Okay, because of that, it cannot fulfill the purpose of a civic building. I don't know if I buy that. Right? Like, what is the purpose of a building? Now, if there was nothing else here, right? Then the answer would just be. You see how this is very like a sufficient assumption question, right? The answer would just be, you know what the purpose is? The purpose is to not be far from the center of the city, right? If you just say that, then, oh, you're far, well, then you don't fulfill the purpose, right? That would be the right answer choice, right? But there's all this other stuff, right? So what is all this other stuff? It could be useless. It could be premise, right? Well, an example of a successful civic building is the art museum. Oh, so here's one that does fulfill the purpose of a civic building, which is situated in a densely populated downtown area, which encourages social cohesion and makes the city more alive. So there you go, right? You at least have this stuff to go on, right? Maybe you have also the distance, right? But I mean, if you just think about what the meaning of the words here are, instead of just focusing on just the formal aspects of the language, right? Think about the meaning. We're talking about civic buildings, we're talking about fulfilling purpose. It's probably not just being close, right? This sounds more purposeful, right? These two things sound more purposeful. Right, so that's why E is right. The purpose of a civic building is to encourage social cohesion and make the city more alive. Right, if that's a purpose, right, now we see why we are arguing to the conclusion that this thing here, by its lonesome on some spectacular hilltop site, is not fulfilling the purpose of a civic building. Right, far from the center city, sparsely populated, right, opposite a densely populated downtown area. How are you going to encourage social cohesion? How are you going to make the city? You're like barely part of the city, right? That's why E works. Now the others, I mean, they just don't. I don't know what a civic building that is located in downtown should be located on an elevated site, right? What? Like, that's not even, I don't even think the critic would agree with this principle. What, move the art museum to a hilltop site? A city needs to have civic buildings to have social cohesion. Sure, yeah, I'm sure you need civic buildings to have social cohesion, right? But that doesn't help us establish our argument. The critic is not trying to say, oh, we as a city really need because, we value social cohesion, so we really need to build some civic buildings, right? I mean, if that was the argument, then yeah, sure, maybe this would be the principle that it conformed to. A civic building with an elevated purpose should be located on a spectacular site. Okay. Right? I mean, it almost seems like, I don't know, this is incredibly irrelevant. It's just talking about this stuff, right? You have to, see, I mean, I say, like, I brush these off as if they're nothing. That's because you're focused on the argument. If you're focused on the argument, you realize that they're just borrowing words that we find in the stimulus, right? Stringing them together in some way, right? But they don't really inform our argument at all. The downtown area of a city should be designed in a way that complements the civic building. Okay, fantastic.